They said she was sculpted by God on one of his better days, and then the devil himself breathed life into the clay. They weren't wrong. Imagine a woman whose reflection could start a war, whose whisper could topple a throne. This wasn't a fairy tale. This was flesh and blood, ambition and silk. This was the Countess of Castiglione. But before the legend, before the whispers in the gilded halls of Paris, there was a girl. And this girl learned a vital lesson in the cold marble corridors of her Florentine home. Beauty is not a gift, it's a weapon. And the most dangerous weapon is the one you're not afraid to use on yourself first. She would become the most photographed woman of her century. A living work of art. But art can be cruel. It demands sacrifice. And Virginia Oldoini, the Countess of Castiglione, would sacrifice everything and everyone, starting with the girl she used to be, to become the icon the world demanded. But what happens when the masterpiece decides to burn its own canvas? Let us begin not at the end, in a shadowed Parisian apartment, but at the dawn of her power, in the chilling quiet of a Florentine villa. It was the spring of 1837 when Virginia was born, a creature of almost unnatural beauty placed into the arms of a mother, Isabella, who saw not a daughter, but a masterpiece of genetics, a final, glorious chance to reclaim the prestige her own fading beauty could no longer command. Her father, the Marquis Filippo Oldoini, was a ghost in her life, a signature on a letter, a distant figure moving through the chess game of European diplomacy. He was a man of gloves and pleasantries, who believed passion was a vulgarity best left to the lower classes. Theirs was a marriage of convenience, and Virginia was its most valuable, and ultimately, most tragic product. She was raised not by them, but by the scent of old paper and leather in the library of her maternal grandfather, Ranieri Lamp. It was he who taught her to see the world not as a stage for emotion, but as a text to be read, to decipher the hidden meanings behind a courtier's smile or a diplomat's carefully chosen words. He gave her the name Nikia, a secret, soft name for a girl who would grow a diamond-hard shell. She grew up in a world of curated beauty, the cool touch of marble on her bare feet, the scent of orange blossoms mingling with beeswax, the distant, melancholic notes of a harpsichord played by a tutor she would never truly know. It was a life of immense privilege and profound emotional neglect. Her mother was not a nurturer, but a curator. Isabella corrected Virginia's posture with a sharp tap, refined her French until it was flawless, and taught her that a woman's silence could be more powerful than any man's declaration. Isabella was grooming a perfect object, an exquisite tool for the family's advancement. The girl Virginia longed for warmth, for a father's embrace, for a mother's unconditional love. But the woman she was becoming, the Countess, learned to feed on admiration instead. It was a colder, but far more abundant, nourishment. By 16, her beauty had become a local phenomenon, a living myth. It was said that men would stop their carriages in the street just to catch a glimpse of her. Her hair was not merely blonde, but a shade of pale gold that seemed to absorb and radiate the Tuscan sun. Her eyes were her most potent weapon, a chameleonic blue-green that could flash with intelligence, smolder with contempt, or feign a devastating vulnerability. They called her the Pearl of Italy, a name that sounded like a compliment but felt like a cage. For a woman in her world, such beauty was a double-edged sword. It was a key that could unlock the highest echelons of society, but it was also a lock that trapped her in the gilded cage of male desire and female envy. Her parents, their fortunes dwindling, saw her not as a daughter to be cherished, but as an asset to be liquidated. Suitors were paraded before her, their worth measured not in character, but in titles and bank accounts. One evening, as her mother fastened a heavy string of pearls around her throat, Isabella murmured, her eyes fixed on her daughter's reflection, "Your face is our family's honor. It is a gift you hold in trust for us." In that moment, something in Virginia shifted. She understood. Her body was not her own. Her face was a flag, a banner for the ambitions of others. That night, she stood on a balcony overlooking the gardens. The sound of a string quartet and the manufactured laughter of the Florentine elite drifting up to her. She looked up at the indifferent stars and felt a profound, chilling sense of detachment. She was an actress, and this was her stage. Her first brush with something resembling passion was with a young naval lieutenant, a brief, clandestine affair of stolen glances and feverish notes. It was a dangerous game, a taste of a life where she could be the subject of her own desires, not the object of others. It ended as quickly as it began, a scandal expertly smothered by her family, but it left a mark. It taught her that passion was a fire that could either warm you or burn your entire world to the ground. She learned to prefer the controlled, strategic warmth of a well-placed flame. Her family's choice for her was a man 12 years her senior, Count Francesco Verassis di Castiglione. He was a courtier to the King of Sardinia, a man of impeccable manners and absolutely no imagination. He was respectable, wealthy, and utterly captivated by her beauty, in the way a collector is captivated by a rare butterfly he wishes to pin under glass. He did not see the sharp, analytical mind behind her eyes. He saw only the perfect surface. Their wedding in Florence Cathedral was a grand spectacle, a public transaction disguised as a holy sacrament. As she stood at the altar, draped in lace and suffocated by the scent of lilies and incense, she felt not joy, not even fear, but a cold, clear-headed resignation. This was the price of her face. This was the surrender required to begin the war. As the priest pronounced them man and wife, a silent vow formed in her heart. They had bought the pearl, but they would never own the woman. The journey to her new home in Turin was a silent one. Francesco made polite conversation. She offered polite smiles. She was no longer Virginia Oldoini. She was La Castiglione. The name felt like a costume, and she would learn to wear it well. Turin was a city of cold elegance and political ambition. It was the heart of the resource, the movement for Italian unification. A city humming with secrets and strategy. Her husband's palace was a mausoleum of good taste, filled with heavy furniture and heavier silences. Francesco treated her with a distant, proprietary affection. He would show her off at court functions like a prized racehorse, proud of the murmurs she created, but in private, he was intimidated by her intellect and her moods. He wanted a beautiful ornament, and he had married a restless, brilliant mind trapped in a flawless body. The solitude was suffocating. She would spend hours staring at her own reflection, not out of vanity, but out of a desperate need to confirm her own existence. She felt herself becoming a ghost in her own life, a beautiful specter haunting the halls of her own marriage. It was her cousin, the brilliant, ruthless architect of Italian unification, Camillo Benso, Count of Cavour, who saw her true potential. Cavour was not a man swayed by a pretty face. He was a master political strategist, a puppeteer who saw everyone as a potential piece on his grand chessboard. He saw past her beauty and recognized the keen, observant mind her grandfather had nurtured. He saw her boredom, her frustration, and he understood that a brilliant, beautiful, and bored woman was the most dangerous and potentially useful creature in any royal court. He began to visit her, engaging her in conversations about politics, about the future of Italy, about the delicate balance of power in Europe. He didn't flatter her. He challenged her. He saw the weapon she could be, and he began to sharpen its edge. He spoke of his grand ambition, to unite Italy under the rule of his king, Victor Emmanuel II. But to do so, he needed a powerful ally. He needed France. And France was ruled by one man, Emperor Napoleon III. Napoleon III was a paradox, a brilliant political mind with a notoriously weak will. When it came to beautiful women, he was known for his succession of mistresses, women who often wielded significant informal influence at his court. Cavour's plan was as simple as it was audacious. He would send the most beautiful woman in Italy to the French court. She would not be a spy in the traditional sense. She would be something far more potent. She would be a presence, a spectacle, a fascination. Her mission, to seduce the Emperor of France. Not just his body, but his political will. She was to become his obsession. And through that obsession, she would convince him to support the cause of Italian unification against the Austrian Empire. Cavour presented this idea to Virginia not as a sordid affair, but as a patriotic duty, a chance to etch her name into the history of a new nation. He was offering her the grandest stage in the world in a role that would make her immortal. He was offering her a way out of the suffocating silence of her marriage. A way to transform her beauty from a cage into a key. Her husband, Francesco, was horrified and then reluctantly persuaded. The honor of the king and the future of Italy were at stake. He would accompany her to Paris, a willing cuckold for the cause of patriotism. In 1855, Virginia, Countess of Castiglione, left Turin for Paris. She was 18 years old. She was a wife and a mother to her young son, Giorgio. But she was also something else, a secret weapon, a Trojan horse of beauty sent to conquer an empire from within its most private chambers. As her carriage rolled towards the Alps, she looked back at the receding plains of Italy. She was leaving behind the girl named Nikia. The woman who would arrive in Paris would be La Castiglione, a creation of her own design, a living work of art built for seduction and intrigue. She felt a tremor of fear, but it was overshadowed by a thrilling, intoxicating surge of power. She had been an object her entire life. Now, she would become an agent of history. The game had begun. Paris in the Second Empire was a whirlwind of opulence and excess. A city remade by Baron Haussmann into a grand theater of wide boulevards and magnificent palaces. It was the center of the world, and Napoleon III was its insecure, pleasure-seeking master. Virginia's arrival was meticulously planned. Cavour's letters had preceded her, whispering of an Italian beauty so divine she had to be seen to be believed. Her first appearance at court, at a ball in the Tuileries Palace, was a masterpiece of stagecraft. She deliberately arrived late, ensuring all eyes would be on her entrance. She wore a gown of ethereal white silk, unadorned by the fussy ribbons and bows of French fashion. Her only jewelry was a simple string of pearls. She wore no corset, a scandalous choice that revealed the natural, perfect lines of her figure. Her pale golden hair was dressed simply, drawing all attention to the astonishing symmetry of her face and the hypnotic power of her eyes. When she entered the ballroom, a wave of silence rippled through the crowd. Men stopped mid-sentence. Women's smiles froze. It was not just beauty. It was an aura, a presence that demanded to be witnessed. The emperor, a man accustomed to being the center of attention, found his gaze drawn to her and held captive. He was a short, unimpressive-looking man, with a waxed mustache and heavy-lidded eyes that betrayed a deep-seated melancholy. He approached her, his usual practiced charm faltering slightly in the face of her serene, almost indifferent gaze. Their conversation was brief, a dance of veiled compliments and subtle challenges. She did not flatter him. She treated him not as an emperor, but as a man who had to earn her interest. It was a strategy of breathtaking audacity, and it worked perfectly. He was utterly intrigued. The conquest of Napoleon III was not a swift, passionate affair. It was a calculated campaign. Virginia surrounded herself with an air of mystery and unattainability. She would appear at court functions in daring, often theatrical costumes of her own design. One night, she came as the Queen of Hearts. Her gown, a cascade of crimson velvet, a tiny golden dagger piercing a fabric heart on her bodice. Another time, she appeared as a spectral nun, her face veiled in black lace, hinting at forbidden passions. She became the talk of Paris. Her every move, every outfit, every rumored witticism was reported in the press. She turned herself into a living spectacle, a mystery that every man in Paris wanted to solve. None more so than the emperor himself. She played him with consummate skill, granting him moments of intimacy, only to withdraw into a cool, enigmatic distance. She made him wait. She made him work. She understood that for a man who could have anything he wanted, the only true aphrodisiac was denial. Their affair, when it finally began, was a thing of national consequence. She would be spirited away to secret rendezvous in private apartments, her carriage cloaked in darkness. They spoke of politics as much as they spoke of love. She would whisper arguments into his ear during their most intimate moments, linking the destiny of France with the liberation of Italy. She was a brilliant student of her cousin's rail, able to translate complex geopolitical strategies into the language of seduction. She would flatter the emperor's ego, praising his vision, his intellect, his destiny to redraw the map of Europe. She made the cause of Italy his own personal crusade, a romantic quest worthy of a Bonaparte. But her influence came at a great cost. She became the most hated woman in Paris. The Empress Eude, a proud and pious Spaniard, despised her with a cold fury. The other women of the court, eclipsed by her brilliance, spread vicious rumors about her. They called her a shameless courtesan, an Italian witch who had bewitched their emperor. Virginia absorbed their hatred and wore it like a badge of honor. She was isolated, but she was powerful. She had the ear of the most powerful man in Europe. Her relationship with her husband, Francesco, disintegrated completely. He had become a pathetic figure, trailing in her wake. The publicly acknowledged cuckold. He eventually returned to Turin, broken and humiliated, leaving her alone in Paris with their son. She had achieved her mission, but she had alienated everyone around her. Her only true confidant was the camera. In an age when photography was a stiff, formal affair, she discovered in it a medium for her artistry. She began a collaboration with the court photographer, Pierre-Louis Pierson, that would last for decades. In their sessions, she was not the subject, but the director. She controlled every aspect of the image, the lighting, the pose, the costume, the narrative. She created hundreds of portraits, casting herself in a dizzying array of roles: a tragic heroine, a seductive sorceress, a pious Madonna, a defiant libertine. These photographs were her true diary, a visual record of the many selves she created and inhabited. Through the lens, she could be anyone she wanted to be. She could control her own image in a way she could not control her own life. In 1858, her political mission reached its climax. After a failed assassination attempt by an Italian nationalist, Napoleon III was finally convinced that an unresolved Italian question was a threat to his own stability. He met Cavour in secret at Plomieres-les-Bains and forged an alliance. France would back Sardinia-Piedmont in a war against Austria in exchange for the territories of Nice and Savoy. The war for Italian unification was about to begin, a war that had been whispered into existence in the emperor's bedroom. Virginia had succeeded. She had delivered an empire to her cousin's cause, but victory was a bitter triumph. Once the alliance was secured, her political usefulness was over. Cavour, her mentor and manipulator, cast her aside. The emperor, his political objective achieved, moved on to new distractions. Suddenly La Castiglione, the center of Parisian life, found herself on the periphery. The invitations slowed. The whispers that followed her were no longer of awe, but of scorn. She had flown too close to the sun, and her wings were melting. The fall was as dramatic as the rise. Plagued by debts and abandoned by her powerful lovers, she became a recluse. The War of 1870 and the fall of the Second Empire sealed her fate. Her world, the glittering, decadent stage on which she had performed, was gone forever. She retreated into her apartment on the Place Vendôme, a world of shadows and mirrors. She had the windows blacked out, lived by candlelight. and shrouded all the mirrors in black cloth. The beauty that had been her power and her curse was beginning to fade, and she could not bear to witness its decline. She became a creature of the night, emerging only after dark for solitary walks, her face hidden behind a thick veil. Her obsession with her own image intensified. She continued her photographic sessions with Pearson, attempting to recapture the beauty of her youth, using darkroom tricks to erase the lines of time. She meticulously curated the legend of La Castiglione, writing letters, editing her photographs, trying to shape the narrative of her life for posterity. She was preparing the final exhibition of her life's work, herself. Her son Giorgio, her one true love, died of smallpox, a devastating blow from which she never recovered. Her isolation became absolute. She lived in a self-imposed prison of memory, surrounded by the ghosts of her past and the hundreds of photographic eyes that stared back at her from every surface. She spent her final years planning a grand retrospective exhibition of her photographs for the 1900 Exposition Universelle in Paris, to be titled The Most Beautiful Woman of the Century. It was to be her final, defiant act of self-creation, her last attempt to force the world to see her as she saw herself. Not as a mistress, not as a spy, but as a true artist whose medium was her own life. But she would not live to see it. In the winter of 1899, on a cold November morning, she was found dead in her shadowed apartment. She was alone, dressed in black, as if ready for a final, solitary performance. The single candle had burned out. The most beautiful woman of the century had died in darkness, a queen in exile from a kingdom that existed only in her own mind and in the haunting, unforgettable images she left behind. She had sought to control her own legend, to become immortal. And in a way, she succeeded. The woman, Virginia Oldoini, was gone. But La Castiglione, the myth, the icon, the terrifying and tragic masterpiece of her own creation, would live forever.